Hey, speaking of art, Gary, have you ever seen Last Year at Marienbad?
Of course, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
just saw it for the first time the other day.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I went into it with no expectations and I loved it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, you see a lot of, looks like the work of a lot of other filmmakers tucked into that, Buñuel and Lynch and numerous others. It's an amazing film.
yeah, yeah. It was a landmark film when it came out, and a controversial film. There were those who saw it as the cutting edge of filmmaking, and those who just thought of it as completely empty posturing. So it was,
I can see both points of view.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was an exciting time when you go back and look at all the debates about that film. I forget what that Last Year at Marienbad, that would have been like 1962, something like that. But yeah,
Really, that late? It looks like an older film,
well, I'll tell you.
but I don't know. I'm just
No, it might be late 50s.
you're looking it up.
I am 61.
Nice.
Close.
You got somebody even put that in the chat. You got 61 in there.
I guess that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Not to us.
Seems like only yesterday to me, but
Right.
All
Yeah,
right.
very influential.
I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. Looks like we got people logged in. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Nick. My name is Nick. I'm one of the events hosts here at Palace Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual and live events by visiting our website at palace.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Jim Woodring in conversation with Gary Groth, talking about Jim's newest release, One Beautiful Spring Day. Jim Woodring is a cartoonist and a fine artist in other mediums and has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Stranger's Genius Award, a United States Artist Fellowship, and he was a finalist for the Los Angeles Book Prize. In his latest release, One Beautiful Spring Day combines 3 previously published volumes, Congress of the Animals, Fran, and Poochytown, in which Frank demonstrated his dizzying capacity for both nobility and disgrace, along with 10 dazzling new pages conceived and drawn by Woodring. The result is a seamless graphic narrative that forges a new and even more poignantly realized single story that takes readers deep into the hidden meanings of the previous stories and offers the most full, complete, astonishing exposition of Frank and his supercharged world to date. Suffice to say, if you are a friend to Frank, you will find One Beautiful Spring Day to be a 1,000-course feast of agonizing bliss, soul-stirring mystery, and luminous depth.
wow, who wrote that?
Anyway, Woodring will be joined in conversation by Gary Groth, co-founder of the Comics Journal and Fantagraphics books, the Fantagraphics books. So today's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, support Jim and Pals by purchasing a copy of his book from us. A link to buy One Beautiful Spring Day will be shared in the chat a couple of times during this event. So, Jim and Gary, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Jim, Fantagraphics has been it's been my great honor to publish Jim for almost 40 years now. If I remember correctly, we started publishing you in 1986.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And so let me, we're going to be talking specifically about Jim's latest book, the official pub date of which is July 26th. It's called One Beautiful Spring Day. It is this book right here. It is a huge 400-page graphic novel starring Jim's anthropomorphic character Frank. And I wanted to first start off by talking about Frank, about the character you created in 1990. Prior to that, Jim did a lot of cartooning. He did writing. He wrote short stories. He worked in animation. A lot of his comics were autobiographical in the 1980s. And in 1990, he created Frank as a kind of platonic cartoon character. And so I'd like to begin by asking you what prompted you to create Frank, and what is it about this character that you have been able to use such a rich font for the last 30 years?
Thank you, Gary. Well, I created Frank, you know, Mark Landman. He had a magazine called Buzz that he edited, and he asked me to do a feature for it. And he said, just draw a comic that looks normal but isn't. And the concept of Frank just popped into my head. The story popped into my head. The whole thing was there. And I drew it up and I thought, that was fun and this has potential. And so I did a 24-page color story called Frank and the River after that.
Right.
And that worked. And I found that these stories just came to me entire, and all I had to do was work out how to tell them and draw them up. It was a lot of work, but very, very little struggle. It just flowed out of me, and I would get the story and I would draw it up, and it was the easiest work I've ever done. You know, ordinarily when I do a picture, one of the kind of spooky pictures that I like to do, it's like a normal drawing. You sketch it out, you re-sketch it out, you work on it, you develop it, and finally you end up with a picture. Excuse me, but the Frank things just came out of somewhere complete. And working on them has always been, I don't exactly feel guilty about it, but I feel kind of funny that they're just so kind of automatic and they depend so little on my own input. And that was the way I did Frank comics for years and years. And the nucleus of this One Beautiful Spring Day book is this story I did called Congress of the Animals, excuse me, which I had the script in hand and I was beginning to work on it. And I thought, you know, I would like to see Frank leave the Uni-Factor, which is the name of the place where he lives, and go somewhere else. So that's what I did. And it turned out to be a mistake. And that the overhauling of that mistake is one of the things that drives the book.
Okay, let me, I'll get back to that, but let me get back to Frank. You said, you once said that the Frank stories have always come to me as if dictated.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, can you talk a little, I mean, there seems to be no struggle, it seems too easy. Can you talk about what you mean by that? I mean, you don't hunch over and sweat out a story and have to figure out what is he going to be doing? How am I going, how am I going to be creating a story this time? You don't have to do that. It just comes.
No, it just comes. I go somewhere quiet with my pad and paper and I write down sentences one after another. Frank wakes up. If that works, I move on to the next line. He leaves the house. If that works, I say he comes to an open field. If that works, I just keep writing them down and I reject the ones that don't work. And at the end, I have a storyline with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and shared characteristics with the other Frank stories. And it's a very mysterious process for me. Like I said, it's a lot of work. Drawing them out takes a lot of time and effort, but the stories have always just come effortlessly.
Now, you also said that you actually write the stories in text.
Yeah, I describe the action in text.
What do those look like? There's obviously no dialogue, nothing you would put in balloons. So it's all descriptive text.
Yeah, it describes the action.
Okay, and is it very, very plain? Just
very plain, very nuts and bolts.
Okay, and then you use that as a basis to to design the comics.
Right, right. I sort of make a storyboard from that. I work it out. I plan the page breaks. I try to plan the timing by making the panels large or small or complex or simple so that I can kind of control the flow of the reader's attention. And so like I say, the actual drawing is a lot of work, but the ideas come effortlessly. And I've noticed after I'd done a few that they all had similar characteristics. Each story ended with whatever equilibrium had been injured, restored. There's always some kind of a moral or a point. And I never used to think that these things were personal, but as time has gone on, I've come to realize that these things are me, some aspect of myself talking to some other aspect of myself. I mean, I didn't even recognize that for the longest time. I thought, oh, this is my gift to the world. And then I had to change my thinking and say, well, it's a lot of work, but if only one person gets something out of this, and that person is me, then I'm good with this. So it would have been beneficial for me to draw these things if I was the only one who ever saw them, because I really have learned a lot about myself and something about the world from doing them. It's very mysterious, the whole thing.
And you learn this after the fact.
Yeah, I realized that after all the stuff. I didn't really realize what was going on with this stuff until after that big collection you published, the Frank book, had already come out. And then I began to think, there's something deeper that going on here than I was originally aware of.
Right. The Frank book, which is a collection of your short stories, Frank's short stories.
Right.
I assume you believe in the unconscious.
Well, I'm unconscious every night, so yeah, I believe in it.
So all of this wells up from that part of your being.
Yeah, some hidden part.
Yeah.
Some hidden aspect of myself that is smarter than this part.
Right. So now, do you consider Frank a naif, a kind of Candide-like character that is acted upon? Is he tabula rasa?
No, not exactly, because he's not a noble personality. He's kind of craven, he's opportunistic, but he occupies a situation which is tailor-made for him. It's like it's as if he were in school or at a job where the rules he has to follow are not the rules he would have to follow if he weren't in that situation. He's in a specifically dynamic situation which caters to him. And so he's not really naive or anything, but he's just in a situation where his job is to experience things.
You said he was an opportunist, but he's also a risk taker. He can also be compassionate.
Oh yeah, he's not a monster, but he's just not noble or anything.
So he's multi-dimensional in that sense. So let's talk about how you constructed this book. This book is actually composed of three. Excuse my cell phone in the background. That's a little Satchmo. The book is actually composed of three previous standalone graphic novels, to which you added an additional 100 pages of comics. So I'd like to know if you could walk me through that process and walk me through how you created the original graphic novels and then how you actually created what I would consider to be a new seamless work out of those and the additional pages you drew.
Well, like I said, Congress of the Animals was the first time that I ever departed from the stories that were given to me. And I wanted to have Frank leave the Uni-Factor and go to some place outside the Uni-Factor's control and bring back a companion. I thought that would be good. I thought it would be more fun if Frank had somebody to share these experiences with. And when I did that, when I made that decision and started changing the story, the Uni-Factor, the place where Frank lives, which is also the voice that tells me the stories, kind of quit in a huff. And it wasn't around to give me any ideas. So I took the ideas that it had given me and blended them into this new story. And it took me a whole year just to work out the story, in contradistinction to how easily the other ones came. This was just a struggle, but you know, I had started it and I had to finish it. And then when I got the book done and Frank had returned to the Uni-Factor with his companion, I realized that I had destroyed the franchise, because the thing that always drove Frank was getting up in the morning and rushing outside to see the world and to experience what was in it. And now that he was kind of as good as married, he would sleep in, he'd read the papers, you know, he wouldn't really have the drive to, I mean, he'd found something really big that satisfied him, so he was less driven to find things, you know what I mean? He was complacent. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want Fran in these stories. And then the Uni-Factor came back and said, here's what we'll do. And it provided the story for Fran, which took her out of the equation in a perfectly dignified and respectable way. And then I took the basis of the original Congress script, which I had rejected, and it developed into Poochytown, which ended without ending. It just kind of stopped. And when I was looking at those 3 books together, I thought, you know, this is like the nucleus of something. And I realized, you know, there is, it's hard to say how the thing came about, but I realized, you know, this is not a finished thing. These books are not complete. This 3-book collection is not complete. This is just a part of this whole thing that is happening here. And the explanation came in the form of surrounding it with contextualizing material to say, here's what's happening in this story. Here's why this happened. Here's why this happened. None of this stuff is mysterious. It's all very easy to follow cause and effect. Mm-hmm. And it also provided the structure that all the Frank stories have, where there's a beginning, and then things change, and then everything is restored at the end. That was missing from all 3 of the previous books. And that kind of bothered me, because I didn't know why they were like that. And getting this new material and wrapping it around those 3 books, and some of it is inserted into those books, it did a lot of things. It contextualized the stories, and it took this gaffe that I had made when I did Congress of the Animals and turned it into a virtue. It was like the sand that creates the pearl. It taught me, you know, you can change the past, because by doing that, I made it so this mistake I made wasn't a mistake. It was a glorious artistic achievement. It was a real daring, outside the box thing for me to do, you know. It was actually kind of great. It wasn't a fuck up. So I was really glad to find out that kind of thing is possible. And then when the whole thing was written out and I saw how it would fit with that, I started seeing echoes and circles within circles and self-referential things that I hadn't anticipated. There's a scene in Fran where Frank is in her house and she has a little model of his house with Pupshaw and Pushpa in it. And yes. He sees it and he says, "That's my house. Those are my friends." And she goes, "Oh." And that was something the Uni-Factor popped in there, along with a number of other things. And it made it so that when I had to alter the course of the situation that I had brought into being, those predicted the answers. It showed that Fran was not what she seemed to be, that she wasn't being honest with him. There's just a lot of information tucked into these little anomalies that were worked into the story. So I've been trying to think about how to talk about this for this thing, and there's an awful lot packed into this, both, you know, from my standpoint and as regards what it means to me, and just also in the book, you know, all these many little incidents that form story arcs, which form story circles. And when the circles intersect, they form more arcs. It's very complicated. It kind of surprised me what emerged from all this.
Right, right. Structurally, I always thought your long Frank stories, there were no three-part act, three act parts of it. It always seems cyclical. The story begins at a certain place and then eventually winds its way back to that same place, to a moment of repose when Frank goes back to his home, for example.
Yeah, well, it had done that in all the stories I'd done up until Congress and Fran and Poochytown.
Right.
And they didn't have that structure.
Right, but then you corrected that.
Yeah. Well, I was given a more complete picture to work with, and that's what emerged.
Tell me about the Uni-Factor. It is the universe in which Frank inhabits, but it is also the guiding agent.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
Behind your creative work.
Well, behind the Frank stories, it's the Frank stories don't really have much to do with my other work. It's a singular outgrowth.
Okay.
And obviously, the Uni-Factor is not something outside me, but it's something that I don't communicate with directly, and it's got a mind of its own, and it reacts when I don't do what it wants. I mean, when I was working on that Fran book, I was miserable for a year hammering that thing out. It was kind of as if I decided, my body runs pretty well without my involvement. I think I'll get involved. My heart's not going to beat unless I make it beat. It was a stupid thing to do.
But you were aware that you were violating the Uni-Factor by...
I didn't, at the time, I didn't really think it was that big a deal. I thought, oh, this will be okay. And I didn't really see anything wrong with it, but it was a mistake.
Right. It seems so, I mean, there has to be a fine line between your own agency, your own conscious attempt at doing a Frank story and what you consider the Uni-Factor to be dictating to you.
Doesn't feel like there's any line at all. It feels like two separate things. I mean, Uni-Factor is, excuse me, Uni-Factor is a very distinct voice and personality.
Yeah.
When it kicks in, I know it's there. And when it's writing those stories, I just make myself quiet and get out of its way, and it does the work. And it's very direct. It knows exactly what it wants.
But it still has to be you.
Oh, of course it is.
Right. Let me see. So, can you talk a little about what motifs you see that you explore in Frank? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of violence inflicted on Frank and others in the story. And most people, I think, would think that the title of the story, One Beautiful Spring Day, is ironic. You've told me it is not ironic. So can you talk a little about how you see the terrible travails that Frank and other characters go through throughout the 400 pages of the book, that end up being a beautiful spring day? Can you tell me how you reconcile those, or how those two incongruities?
Well, I mean, everything, and all's well that ends well. I mean, these things happen, and they're just his experiences. They're just like regular life. There's good and bad in every wind that comes up the street, and it's a dangerous place, and he runs afoul of things, but nothing's ever permanent. So it's I don't know. It's almost like a testing ground.
It's yeah. I mean,
nothing matters. There's no final consequences, and everything is controlled. It's not like real life where things spiral out of control and they never return. It's some kind of loop, or not loop, but there's some kind of point to it that wants to function within the setup that it's created and maintain that function. So as you say, it's cyclical. Things just, it starts, something happens, that thing is undone, it stops, and that happens over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much trauma visited upon the characters, and yet, Frank perseveres.
Yeah, he does persevere. There's a scene in One Beautiful Spring Day where he's suicidally depressed and he's about to cut his throat with a big blade. And I think that's the only time he's gotten down in any of these stories, when he's been morose. Generally, these things happen, and as soon as they're over with, they don't bother him at all.
Right.
And as for the title, One Beautiful Spring Day, that just popped into my head as the title for the book. And I thought that it was because when my son was young, I used to tell him stories, and they all started out one beautiful spring day. And when that phrase popped into my head, I thought, okay, that's kind of cute. That kind of works. It doesn't have to refer to the story in any particular way. It's just a title. None of my books really have titles that that make a lot of sense necessarily in relationship to the story. And I thought, well, this works. And it's an attractive phrase, one beautiful spring day. And then after I had adopted it, I realized, oh, the words one day is what that's about.
Right, right.
And that was, that was fortuitous.
There's a, for want of a better word, there's a kind of purity to Frank and the entire Frank universe, because it's a universe that you have created not out of whole cloth, but that doesn't rely upon, contemporary, the kind of contemporary imagery that we see every day, all the time, in our homes, outside of our homes, buildings, cars. It's a constructed universe that seems to have flowed completely out of your own imagination, where everything is metaphorical. And Frank's journeys don't rely on contemporary social situations. He's not going out, he's not interacting in ordinary situations. These are all like dreamlike situations. So I'm curious as to whether you see this as a kind of pure distillation of, and I want to add that it's so emotionally grounded. You're able to create this entire metaphorical universe that is so deeply rooted in the kind of emotional and psychological reality that we all experience. So I'm curious as to why, I guess do you see a certain, is this like a distillation of how you perceive life, as opposed to drawing, characters, walking around and interacting with friends and so on? I mean, I know that's an awfully long and possibly.
Well, I guess it must be, because ultimately I am the author of these things, and this must be what interests me. This way of looking at the world, looking beyond the world at what's happening, all that kind of thing.
So how did you, everything in the book, everything in the book is metaphorical. All of the the landscapes are an important part of the, I'd say as important as the characters in the book. They're all dramatic. They're all rolling hills, cliffs, fissures. Can you talk a little about what part the visual landscapes of the book plays in Frank's life?
Well, a lot of that is stuff that I pick. When I have the story, he has to go from one place to another. It doesn't really matter most of the time what that place is or what it looks like. I grew up in Southern California, and I always liked those rolling hills and the little trees on them and the bushes. So that's the way I draw the landscape. Um,
And the odd shapes of buildings and urns, and where does all that come from?
well, that comes from the Uni-Factor. Those ideas are described to me, and I draw them up. One thing about those stories is that there's a lot of there are many sequences where there are buildings and objects and things on display that are kind of things you've never seen before. You don't know what they are. And I realized that in scenes where the characters are looking at some object which is on display, and there are just things on display here for you to walk up and look at, that those things are, I think, intended to be looked at and read. You know, I think because there's no words, and because this story couldn't be told in words or even with words, if it were a regular comic strip with dialogue and labels and everything, it would be difficult because there's a lot of things that there aren't any words for. You have to see them and intuit what's going on there. And so I'm a little, I wonder sometimes if people reading this don't just turn a page and go, oh my God, here's more of this crack-brained psychedelic foofarall, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, all of those objects, all the things that happen in those stories really bear scrutiny. There's a number of scenes where he's in a kind of a museum-like setting, looking at things, and those things are meant to be looked at by the viewer as if they were in a museum, looking at it and trying to derive information from it. And they speak primarily to me. The ones that I've deciphered, I can see exactly how they relate to my life. But I have to say, I wonder how other people see that, if they just feel that it's kind of this kind of mindless subconscious noodling that I do, where when I'm short for an idea, I just throw in some bizarre object. I really don't do that. These things have meaning, and I draw them over and over again to get them so that they have an appearance that is resonant with the words. There's a kind of, you know, when I'm writing the things out, if a passage is right, if an idea is right, it kind of fluoresces in my mind. I can't see what's illuminating it, but something's making it glow. And it's the same with the props and symbols in this. If I don't have them right, I may not be able to tell why they're not right, but I have to do it until I can go, okay, that's it. And almost never can I tell why it's right. But this just gives me that little taste of soul warmth that lets me know that, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be.
And now, you know, you mentioned, you just said that they have to cohere with the words, but of course there are no words.
Well, the words that I wrote it down with.
Right, but it strikes me as these symbols have to be even more potent because it's a silent strip. There are no words.
Yeah, but I think that also makes it so that it's kind of difficult to tell what's important and what is just sort of a side show kind of a thing, something you see on the way. And that happens with written works too. You know, you don't always grasp the significance of something while you're reading about it in a story, and then later on you realize it was significant.
Why did you choose to make it silent? Why did you choose to
not? Well, as you said, there's no current events, there's no real correspondence with this world. And if I had them speaking, they'd be speaking in idiomatic English, and that would tie it to this culture and this time. And also, if they were speaking, they would have to name and identify things and describe what's going on. Hold on just one second. And
call from
hold on
Woodring,
just a second. Where was I?
You were talking about how you eschewed words because you.
Oh yeah, right. Well, for that reason, because I wanted it to be beyond time and place and culture.
Seeking a kind of universality. Yeah.
I'm calling to say that
Arfamo.
I'm good on the 6:15. Then I'm going to go to Linda's, and then I'll be home. And
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
Um,
So you were seeking a universality
well, the ideas,
and pure.
the stories had that universality. They were about something that was, I could see very, very clearly without the obfuscating filters of other people's opinions or a cultural take on something or a political divide. There's none of that influencing the way this is. It doesn't have a point of view to uphold or represent. There's no ethos or moral structure at all. It's just things happening in a cause and effect kind of way that is instructive. It's all information.
Right, right.
Make sense?
Absolutely. Now, you know, yeah, I mean, the Frank work reminds me of Chaplin and Keaton.
Hmm.
In that they're able to invoke complex emotions, you know, without words. Of course, you know, they did have title cards here and there. But you were talking about how important the symbols were. This might be a good time to show some of the work and maybe talk, for you to talk about some of those symbols, if you can do that.
In the book, yeah, sure thing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to move my laptop, so I'm gonna put a little piece of tape over the camera so nobody gets vertigo. So you can.
And while you're doing that, let me ask you a couple of other questions. Is it more challenging as a cartoonist to do wordless comics than it is to do comics with words, which you've also done?
I am being. Hold on a second, just a second.
No problem.
Hey, hold on just 1 minute. This will only take a second.
Call from Woodring, ready.
While Jim's doing this, let me.
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. You know, Jim, while you're getting set up, let me show the viewers. We're publishing a regular edition of the book, and we're also publishing a very limited signed and numbered edition of the book that's going to be a hardcover that's in a slipcase. And I happen to have the slipcase and a copy of the cover proof here, and I'd like to show that to you. It's really
Great.
beautiful design slipcase with a fabric cover, and the cover of the hardcover looks like this. This is a proof of the hardcover.
You have the end pages?
We don't have the end pages. I wasn't able to grab the end pages.
You colored those end pages too.
Yeah, I think we should, we should mention just how stunning the design is. Justin Allen Spencer in our office designed the book with Jim.
Yeah.
And as Jim can show you in a moment, it has a vellum dust jacket on a hard soft cover.
You see that?
Yep, absolutely. And Justin, our designer, colored the front and back covers.
Yeah, it's a wraparound cover, and it doesn't, when you trash the vellum wrapper and you only have this book left, there's nothing on the book anywhere to indicate what it is except for the Fantagraphics logo on the spine here at the base. The rest of it is completely without identifying mark at all. I'm just going to leave it out of this thing for a second. One thing I really like about this design is
That's upside down, Jim. There we go.
That better?
That's perfect.
Yeah. So you open the book and there's no end papers or anything. There's the title page immediately, and then there's the story immediately. And the book starts with a sunrise, like so many Frank stories do. And it goes on from there for 400 pages. I can show you something interesting right here if you'd like.
Absolutely.
When I committed that transgression and rewrote Poochytown. I started it out like this. There's this balloon with this indolent character in it, and he arouses the ire of this character, Whim, by disrespecting him. And so Whim snaps off the tip of a stalagmite and throws it and punctures the balloon. And the balloon descends, and the guy in the balloon is throwing out his personal belongings to slow his descent. And they crash on the ground near Frank's house. And one of the things is this croquet set, which becomes the nucleus, the driver of the story. And after I had seen the errors of my way and redone the book, and had done Fran to sort of atone for my crimes there, I had to start Poochytown, and it's the same sequence, the same balloon, the same character. All this is exactly the same, but they're not the same pages. I redrew these pages line for line, because when it gets to this page here, instead of the croquet set, she walks past it to this instrument in a case here. And I had to redraw them, even though it took me a long time, because for one thing, it's not the same sequence. It's a different sequence occurring in a different time, and it just looks the same. So it really had to be different. And I also had to demonstrate my sincerity and depth of commitment to this project.
So this was, in a sense, a course correction.
Pardon me?
This was, in a sense, a course correction.
It was very much that. And it was also an atonement and an affidavit of sorts. There's a sequence near the beginning in the new material. Frank's having a really bad morning, and he gets to this mini mall, and there's a movie theater in the mini mall, and he goes into it. Can you still see the book?
Yep, perfect. That's great. Yeah.
So he goes into this movie theater, and what's showing on the screen is this very abstract, violent, unpleasant film. And it ends just by being horribly lachrymose, and Frank is thrown into a suicidal stupor over it. And then almost at the end, he revisits that theater, and he goes back into it, and there's a comedy playing. This character here, I think, is based on the surrealist painter Yves Tanguy, or however you pronounce his name. And it's just an overtly funny bit. And, you know, the same theater that was showing this revolting, soul-destroying tragedy is now showing this lighthearted comedy. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the overarching points of this book, that put it simply, things change. So
It's simply what?
things change.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Is the volume fluctuating?
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
So
I have to say that's a lovely image. That 3/4 page image of him watching in the theater is just is a terrific image.
one of those things I had to draw 3 or 4 times to get right. Most of these, not most, but many of these pages have been done in their entirety more than once.
And why is that? What do you find lacking that you have to redraw a page? What kinds of things?
Till I get it, so that I get that fluorescent warm glow out of it. I mean, I know when it's right, and if it's not right, I have to do it over. So I've got.
Now, can you be more specific regarding the warm glow? Is it a drawing a glitch, or is it an angle? Is it the imagery itself?
It's as if you were writing a story and you had a paragraph that just didn't work. So you want it to. The mood isn't there. The feeling isn't there. So I have to redo it.
Yeah.
You could write a paragraph and draw a 6-page sequence.
Now, you know, one of the things I find most amazing about your work, Jim, is that the sheer level of invention. Here, that's a great example. That and the preceding few pages, and the following few pages, but the sheer level of graphic invention. And I'm curious. I mean, you have to devise ways in which Frank moves from one, you know, terrifying situation into another. Things, you know, things often get worse and worse and worse before they get better, and they're done in such a well, in such an inventive way that no one but you could actually conceive them. And I'm wondering, aside from the Uni-Factor, I'm not going to let you use that, but aside from the Uni-Factor, I mean, can you talk a little about the process of how you get from A to B to C?
Well, I think I already have. The ideas come like an inspiration, and then I just have to work hard to work them up, and I know when they're right. It's really pretty simple. Where the ideas come from.
Okay, how about graphically conceiving the, you know, the particular scene, such as Fran walking up to that gigantic chasm. I mean, is that something that you plan, like, well, it could be a chasm, or it could be a mountain, or it could be something else, or does it just come full blown as what it is?
You mean this scene here?
Yeah.
This is, I think, maybe the first time that I did something that wasn't strictly linear, where you see her here, and then you see her, she's on the other side of the chasm already. So it's as if she's crossed it effortlessly and instantaneously.
Right, and the reader doesn't know how.
That was in the script. At this point, you're just beginning to get glimpses of how she's not what she seems. And I wanted her to have, she's got a prior relationship with this guy here before she went slumming with Frank. And he's a formidable monster. He's terrifying. But
did these creatures have names in your text?
Sometimes.
Okay.
That one did have a name, but I can't recall it at the moment. And this is Fran here. When they finally track her down where she is, this is her form when she's not being Fran, or a form. So this is like the first time you really see what a complex, slumming goddess of a creature Fran is. See, he tried.
Now there's a great sequence I'd love you to show us that's coming up where Frank is forlorn and he screams out of pain.
Oh yeah, he's been jilted.
Yeah.
Love of his life.
Something we've probably all felt.
Like JC and
there you go. And I mean, he just screams at the heavens, and the heavens come down on his head.
Yeah, he had a breakdown. After I did this, it kind of reminded me of that scene in that David Lynch movie. Is it Lost Highway, or no? It's not Lost. Maybe it is Lost Highway, where the guy just has a breakdown and he turns into another person. He's so he becomes another person. I thought this is kind of like that. Just you completely lose your grip on your identity, and it has a effect on you.
And this is a perfect example of your, being able to express such psychic tumult in purely graphic terms and purely metaphoric terms.
Well, when you have,
I have to say,
you need to work it up. I mean, I'm not trying to come up with smoke to fill the void. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and like I say, I have a sense of when it works. I like this sequence here. It's like the things you would see in an electron microphotograph.
Now you also did some magnificent double page spreads for the new stories. I wonder if you could show a few of those, just a couple of those. We also have some questions I'd like to get to.
Yeah, okay. Here's a double-edged, double-page spread.
Oh yes.
And then there's that one that was used on the, well, this is a spread from.
Now on that particular spread, the one you just showed, how do you go about constructing that? I mean, do you start? I mean, yeah. How do you go about doing that practically? Do you start at the edge of the tip of it? That looks like it's looking at Pupshaw, or do you start in where do you start, and how do you construct?
Well, the idea that this huge, ever-changing, convoluted empire of that is related to wherever it is Pupshaw and Pushpaw come from. This is like whatever kind of animals Pupshaw and Pushpaw are. This is their great getaway or something. This is like a Disneyland for them, or Plato's Retreat or something. Where they go to have fun, and they're off having fun for most of this story, which is only fun until it isn't anymore.
Let me ask you a question from Michael Avolio. Could you give some examples of things you've learned about yourself and the world through the Frank stories, whether by looking back on the short stories or by assembling One Beautiful Spring Day?
Well, one thing I learned specifically from One Beautiful Spring Day, there's a sequence in here where I spent a long time working on this. He's in a really dire circumstances, and he gets out, and he has this sort of expanding vision. This was really hard to figure out. There are a lot of outtakes from this situation. And this actually, there's something hidden in here that kind of is fully expressed here. And then there's this and this. And then while he's in this posture, this sequence starts up, which has the emblem of the authority which has placed him there. And I was seriously thinking about things, and it suddenly dawned on me with a kind of terrifying clarity that if I go deep into my own mind, there's nothing in there. There's no Jim Woodring inside me. There's the idea that I exist and nothing else. There's no shining red beam or core of light that is me. It's just the idea. And there's nothing else. And that struck me with the force of revelation. I got up, I was so excited, I wrote down, I don't exist, so I wouldn't forget it. And that was a direct outcome of this. And like I said, I also learned you can change the past. And I learned that that forgiveness is something, well, I don't even want to go down that road. That's too tricky. But
Are you
hard
sure?
to put into words I learned from this book.
Now, Jim, you were going to say something about forgiveness. That sounded
Well,
significant.
you're getting into kind of deep philosophical waters that I'm not qualified to address. There's
I'm sure everybody would want to hear.
better for me to think about these things than talk about them. I'm still contending with it all.
One reader confirmed that it was Lost Highway that you were referring to.
Good.
Here's another question from Mark Goldstein. I wonder if you'd mind speaking to your mythos. What are some of your aesthetic and spiritual touchstones?
Well, my aesthetic touchstones are expressive images where people use visual art to convey ideas that are
elusive and hard to nail down, but are still communicated by these great artists. And spiritually, I'm Advaita Vedanta as a spiritual philosophy is primarily what interests me.
Can you throw out a couple of names of artistic touchstones?
Oh yeah, sure. Hieronymus Bosch, Horace Artzabashev, all the great surrealists that everybody loves, all those, some of the great advertising artists of the 40s and 50s, just anybody who uses language for self-expression rather than to document consensus reality.
Is there anyone you love that would surprise people that you love the artist?
Golly.
Doris Day or someone like that.
Doris Day? No. I used to have a video, an audio cassette of Nancy Reagan reading her autobiography. I liked that.
That's what we're looking for.
That's a piece of work right there.
I could see where that could have inspired half the characters in the Frank mythos.
Yeah, you have to. If you don't come across perversity like that every day, and you need to pay attention when you do.
Right. Well, you do now every day, but
yeah, you do now.
We have another question. Are there any plans to reprint those 80s autobio comics? I believe all those comics are available in a big, beautiful, oversized hardcover called Jim.
Correct. All those.
You could buy that from Powell's this very moment.
It's a disturbing book. I didn't really realize until I had that book in my hands and I was looking at it thinking, God, I'm really a messed up individual here. I really fully grasped it until that point.
Are you talking about Jim, the book Jim?
The book Jim. That's a big slab of insanity right there. But it all made perfect sense to me when I was doing it. I thought, oh boy, this is great. I'm doing something really significant here.
Well, I think it's a marvelous book, and as you know, Jim, I'm a big fan of your autobiographical comics. Not that I'm sorry that you moved over to Frank, but I wish you could do both simultaneously. But I love your autobiographical work.
Well, when I was a lot younger, that made sense. I don't think anybody wants to hear the ruminations of an old man in that format. I just don't think it would work very good. At least
Mia Wolf asks, do you ever have what I call painter head after a long studio session where you go out and everything is a painting?
No, but I'm not a great painter like you are. I know Mia, she's a terrific artist. You published a book of hers.
We did. We just published her book just a couple of months ago. Mia Wolf. Do you still draw with the finger fetter pen nib?
I do, although the quality of those has dropped. I haven't found ones that were usable in a long time, so I'm using the ones that I have left and learning how to use other nibs.
John Kelly wants to know what you do with your quote mistake pages.
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking of having like an online sale of stuff like that instead of a GoFundMe or something like that. It's just a way of getting rid of those pictures and making some money. So I'm planning on doing that, I guess.
Well, he'd like to see a collection of those. So you and I should talk.
Well, no, you don't want a collection of them because they're like these drawings in this book, except there's just something a little bit wrong with them. And they're not all complete either. They would be of interest to somebody who wanted to practice their inking by inking in over my pencils. But other than that, I don't think they have much value. Some of them are okay. This one here, this is a drawing that I did many times. I think I did 4 complete versions of this.
Of that spread?
Yeah, it's a big drawing, and I kept having to, well, originally this thing here looked like this. And then it just didn't work because it was too, this is something he's thinking as he's falling asleep, something he's remembering. So it's not this, but it's influenced this. Like the way dreams reflect things that are in your mind, but they look different. So this is a real memory, and this is like a dream.
You know, I have to opine that possibly one of the reasons that Frank is so resonant, the stories are so emotionally resonant, is because they, you know, all of the imagery, all of the wild imagery is not just random. I mean, it signifies something to you.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
I think that somehow that is conveyed to the reader.
That's,
I mean, if it was just a lot of arbitrary, albeit fascinating imagery, that would be one thing. But everything means something to you.
well, yes, that's
And I think somehow that is communicated.
yeah, well, I mean, I can't necessarily say it means something to me because I don't always know what it means, but I know when it's right.
Mm-hmm.
These 2 pages I did a number of times, and when I said that this is something he experienced, you can see it in this panel. This is something that he saw. It's not related to anything in the book. But as he's drifting off to sleep, he's playing with his mind kind of, and it's assuming there's different shapes. And this reminds him that he saw this thing, and then he's focusing on this memory of this thing, and then it corresponds to a kind of, you know how your mind will take things and just kind of run with them. Starts with this and it proceeds through this until it gets to this recurring symbol, and then he's immersed in this nightmare, this war nightmare. So
Right. So everything means something to you on some level. You know, I know this is a question you probably can't answer, but all the more reason to posit it. I mean, you're relying on what you call the Uni-Factor, which might be some interior instinct, but that's what gives you your sense of aesthetic right and wrong. Is that a reasonable way of putting it?
well, not in a general sense. I mean, my sense of aesthetics, how to compose a picture, what looks good and what doesn't, is you know, that's all subjective, and that comes from me. But whether I'm getting the sense or the meaning or the events right comes from the Uni-Factor.
Okay.
I mean, pictures could be drawn by different people with different techniques and showing different versions of these events.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they were faithful to the meaning of it and the structure of it, then the Uni-Factor would be satisfying. But
Do you think that's even possible for another, you know, for an artist to draw the same events in a meaningful way? I mean, is that not unique to you, what you're depicting here?
well, it probably is for all practical purposes, but it's not that it has to be that way. Certainly, somebody else could do a version of this story. It's possible.
All right.
So I return to the camera, turn away from the book.
Sure. Yeah, we want to see you before we leave.
Yeah, well, I want to get.
Do you think it's? I mean, I might be, asking how many angels are dancing on the edge of a pin, but do you think that the Uni-Factor is a result of your own cultivating the Uni-Factor? That is, that it's not something outside you; it's something within you that.
Oh, definitely. As you know me pretty well, Gary. You know, I'm not wrapped real tight in some ways, and I've got a lot of conflicting things that I'm still resolving within myself, and I have. I don't know if I'm sure they're not unique, but I have my own set of difficulties pertaining to my personality and the way I see the world and everything else that I'm
constantly dealing with. And I think maybe this is just an outgrowth of my inordinate introspection. Maybe this is just comes from spending all this time navel gazing and trying to figure out what's wrong with me and how I can fix the situation, you know? That might have something to do with this. But
in a way you are wrapped tight because you have a vision from which you cannot deviate.
well, that's true. That's true. I'm locked into this. This is one thing I'm doing successfully, but that's not that most can't be said about my life in general. You know, I'm not real adroit in most ways.
Right.
And I have a
Right.
really hard time socially. You know, I'm very bad at reading people and reading situations, and self-control is not one of my strong points. So maybe that's one of the reasons I expand so much into this world. It means, you know, it's kind of a test situation where there's no tangible bad effects and I can just sort of play with it.
Right. Well, let me address the Powell's people. Do we have any more time, or do we have to, do we have to take off? We have a few more questions we could answer.
Hey, maybe if you just maybe like how about maybe one more question and just a couple more minutes.
Maybe a few more minutes. Okay. Well, here's an interesting question. Brandon Chung, what is the first drawing you remember being proud of?
Well, the first drawing I ever did that I thought was a total success, or that did what I wanted it to do, not a total success, but the first picture I ever made that was what I wanted to do, I made when I was 26, and it was a drawing called Barnyard Trouble. And it was like,
Oh yeah, I
when I
remember.
finally cracked that code and I did that picture, it was like all of a sudden I was able to create my own metaphysical pornography. I mean, when I made a drawing that I thought worked, I could just stare at it as avidly and as lovingly as I looked at any other work of art by anybody else, maybe even more so because it spoke to me so directly. And that was a big day when I made that drawing. I'd been struggling to it for years.
Did you not publish that in your own self-published Jim
No, I did. It is in there.
auto journal? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great.
And it's in the gym book too, but that was a breakthrough drawing for me.
A couple more quick things. Michael Hill just wants to say that yours was the best reminiscence about Jack Kirby in the Comics Journal Kirby Tribute issue.
Oh, what a nice thing to say. Thanks.
One person enjoyed the film, The Illumination of Jim Woodring.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
And let's make this our last question from Andres. You have presented Fran as much more evolved and powerful than Frank. What was her purpose in getting together with Frank? If you believe the premise of the question.
Yes. You know, since when I did that story, I didn't have it in mind that she was powerful. I just wanted him to have a companion. That was the Uni-Factor's idea. That was the Uni-Factor's way of taking her out of the equation by predicting and then demonstrating that she was, you know, she was a much bigger force in the universe than he is, which is true of Pupshaw and Pushpa too. They're more powerful than he is. He's like, you know, Frank has something in common with me and maybe with some other people, which is that he doesn't do anything. He just suddenly appeared in the world and was given the means to get by and create things and have experiences. He didn't build any of it. It was just bestowed upon him. And all he does is experience it. So,
and as we are fortunate enough to experience your work.
yeah, there was a, you know, our mutual late lamented friend, Gil Kane, told me a story once. He said that there was a person who wanted to be a great trumpet player. And they practiced and they practiced. And one day they sort of prayed to the universe and they said, I really, really want to be a great trumpet player. I want to change the music world. And he heard a voice say, yes, do that. Go forth and be a great musician. Fast forward 50 years, the guy is sitting in a hotel room and he's thinking, I gave my life over to playing that stupid horn. I neglected my family. I hurt people. I did all these terrible things just so I could play this stupid trumpet. What a stupid, sad waste of a life. And he hears that same voice and it says, yes, what a stupid, sad waste of a life. Hill told me that story. And then I read a thing by Francis Ford Coppola where he said that what he wanted, he said, you know who I admire? It's Woody Allen. Whatever you may think of what he's done or not done, he writes, he directs his films. There's no outside interference. They're perfect. They're simple. They're all his. I really respect that kind of artistic integrity and that level of achievement. And then following that, I read a remark by a senior monk, or one of the founders of essentially of the Ramakrishna order, this great, great monk who said, I have done what a man should do in life. And I thought, that's a really terrific progression of ideas. And when I thought back to that voice saying, yes, what a sad, horrible waste of a life, I thought, well, that's not going to happen to me.
And indeed, to date, it hasn't.
Yeah.
Not yet. We are postponing the inevitable.
Well, on that note, and on those series of artistic statements, I guess we'll end. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank pals, everybody who watched, and everybody who contributed. Thanks.
I want to thank everybody too. I really appreciate this opportunity, pals, and thank you for doing this, Gary. And thank you to everybody who tuned into this. It means more to me than words can say. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you both so much. And thanks for sharing your work with us, Jim, and thanks for being
my
here.
pleasure. I assure
Yeah.
you. Thank you for making this valuable internet time available to me.
Absolutely. So definitely go check out One Beautiful Spring Day. It comes out the 26th of July, I think. So pre-order it, or pre-order it and do that now. Definitely go check it out. I put a link in the chat there to check it out, or check it out on pals.com. And while you're there, check out many future events that we have upcoming. And thank you all for just joining us today. So, all right, goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Bye.